on the show today, Dr. Ela Manga. So Dr. Ela was at the Breathwork Day and I think did a very popular session that people really liked. She's a breathworker. She's got an interesting background in various things I'm sure we'll get into. And I said to myself, I want to interview this person and have her on the show because I had someone else was doing that interview that day. So Ela, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mark. I've been so excited to talk to you, actually.
It's my pleasure. And how do you generally sort of describe yourself if someone says, you know, at a party, what do you do? What's your quick response?
So I'm an integrative medical doctor with a special interest in burnout and breathwork as a tool for healing, really.
Great. I know it was a sort of scientific element of what you do combined with our, you know, embodiment stuff that particularly people liked on the conference Breathwork Day. But let's take a step back. You're in Johannesburg today. Is that where you grew up?
So I was born in South Africa, and I was born and grew up in a little town, a coastal town called Port Elizabeth. Okay. And I moved up to Johannesburg to study medicine when I was 18, and I've been here ever since.
So how did a respectable medical doctor get interested in crazy breath work and other stuff? What happened? What's the story, Ela?
Yeah, wow. So, I mean, you know, I went the whole conventional route. I studied medicine, did my internship, did my community service at a major Joburg hospital. And I found myself pretty burnt out and not a very nice person at the end of that time.
Right.
You know, I was exhausted, I was sleep deprived, and I had initially planned on specializing in obstetrics and gynecology. But by the end of my time in comm service, I was just completely exhausted. And so I chose the easy route of doing GP work. And I locumed at a GP practice for a year and then subsequently bought it because I enjoyed it so much. And I just loved having more time with my patients. I loved having time to have a conversation with them and to get to know them. You know, in the public hospital setting, you know, it's such a factory line, really. And quite dehumanizing, you know, and I suppose I found myself cut off from my own humanity. And it was through my work as a GP that I found myself reconnecting to that. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it's such a crazy, confusing, personally difficult time. You know, my brother had just committed suicide. So I was trying to process all of that. You know, I was doing a lot of meditation. I was exploring all kinds of things. And I suppose as I started to delve into, you know, I suppose it was an existential experience. And in asking myself some questions and reading and exploring and doing my own healing, that translated into the way that I was treating my patients. And so I started to see interesting patterns emerging. I started to see very real connections between what people were experiencing physically and what was going on emotionally. And of course, medical school doesn't really equip you to address the body-mind connection, you know.
Okay, let me jump in because you've said a lot of good stuff. So I want to kind of recap a few things, highlight a few things, if I may.
Please.
Like the first thing, I've heard this story of dehumanization from many medical people from around the world. So we just did this COVID Calm project where we're talking to doctors and nurses and helping them with their stress levels around COVID. And what was interesting is many sort of said, you know, we've been under stress a long time, certainly public healthcare systems. The average GP, you know, in Britain only gets 3 minutes to talk to their patients. So I was surprised when you said it was spacious there. But all around the world, it seems like it's almost a dehumanizing process that almost inevitably leads to burnout in the way the young doctors are pushed, you know, junior doctors are already pushed, and the hours and the conditions in the States, in the UK, in Russia, many places where I have friends who are in the medical services. And it's almost a process people go through where they're taught to treat themselves and others like objects just to survive. And I go, how can that end well? How can that end well for them, let alone all of us who are in this, you know, being serviced by this medical profession?
Exactly. And it seems to be a cycle that gets perpetuated, you know, generation after generation after generation, because this is the way that it is. And it seems to be a global thing.
Yep.
And I'm not sure, you know, because it makes no sense.
Right. Like, these are the people who deal with people. Like, I've worked with many doctors, and I respect their intellects. And I've also come to be, I was slightly amazed at how bad some of their soft skills were.
Right.
Like, I'm like, wow, you're telling people they have cancer and you have those soft skills? Like, not even like first-year therapy students would have skills that bad.
Well, that's a symptom of burnout, Mark.
Right.
You know? So,
Say more,
I mean,
say more, yeah.
yeah, I think that doctors begin their careers burnt out.
Right. By the time they're even qualified, they're burnt out, right? They've had to do the junior doctor stints in the, final sort of, few years.
Yeah, exactly.
And you had this personal tragedy, and it seems like many people who got into embodiment practices had some kind of a push of pain or trauma that pushed them out of the mainstream to say, well, what else is there? And I was this the point you started studying sort of breath work and meditation and these kind of things, or was it previous to
I
that?
found, it's interesting that you say that it was one event, and I think that it was part of a series of events, and I think the seeds of the way that I think were sown very early on in my life.
Right.
I grew up in an extended Indian family, and so I've had a series of losses. My dad died when I was 3, and my grandfather, who's the most amazing man, stepped into my life and had a pivotal role in the way that I saw life, that I saw death. And I think that those seeds were planted very early on in my life. Just, seeing life in a different way, connecting to nature. My relationship with nature was really, really embedded in my first 5 years of my life. So I suppose it was when I started to practice medicine in a conventional kind of boxed way that I felt a disconnect from that essence of myself, of my wiring.
Right.
And
okay.
it was it almost didn't sit well with me because I guess it was I realized that it was one-dimensional.
Right.
And so my personal tragedy, I suppose, supported my own exploration of myself, and that expansion then I suppose supported me to relate to my patients differently and to relate to their pain differently.
Yeah. That's a tragedy I share with you, by the way. I had a cousin who I was raised with who killed himself. And it's not something I generally talk about publicly, but I processed it enough that I don't feel like I'm venting here. And there's a way in which suicide brings forth a question of, is life livable? What makes life livable? Which, for those who haven't been exposed to suicide through a loved one or through their own thoughts of suicide, that's a default. Like, well, of course we live. Of course we don't have a choice. We just live. And I think for me, my experience, and it may be yours, let me know, is there's a way in which suicide highlights, like, what's life really about? Like, what makes life worth living? And when it's someone close, it's like that's all. Since I was 13, suicide has been an option for me. By that, I don't mean I'm depressed or suicidal, but far from it. I'm a pretty happy guy, and enjoying life. But the fact that it was in my family meant that life was an option, not a given. Right. And I think that changes how you view things.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. I think when one gets that close to death, when death becomes part of life, then, like you said, the way that you choose to show up in your life is different, because it's something that you choose every day. The way that you live is something that you choose every day.
Right. Choice is underlined as a thing. And as you say, like, in a way, the kind of COVID thing around the world has been making this death meditation for so many people who aren't used to it, who aren't doctors, who aren't, I've served in humanitarian organizations in war zones. And without that, it feels like people have death hidden away. And it really, something is lost in life when that's the case.
It's so interesting because in my journey, and after, I know I didn't answer your question about how I came to breathwork, but I will get there. But breathwork, you know, has become a big part of my personal life, and of course, integrated into my work. And it's just such a powerful medicine. And
Right.
and I've come to realize that you know, the deeper that breath takes me into my essence, the closer my relationship with death is becoming. So I'm feeling like my process of understanding myself and understanding life is taking me closer to death. And so for me, healing is the relationship between breath and death. And I know that may seem really confusing, but
Well, I love that we've dived in at the deep end here. I think we're going to be friends, but it's for me, breath is the most connection to life, right? I mean,
right.
it's the thing we die quickest without. We can go, what is it? You know, 3 days without water and 3 weeks without food and 3 weeks without sleep. But if we go 3 minutes without breath, we're in trouble,
All
right? So
right.
there's this existential connection with breath.
Yeah, absolutely. But when we are brave enough to face our own mortality, and we allow ourselves to go there courageously and bravely, then we show up to life very differently.
Even a breath hold, like I do the kind of Wim Hof breathing most mornings, and you do a breath hold, and it's like you're consciously doing the opposite of what keeps you alive.
Yeah.
Like there's something in that. And then of course the body
Yeah.
goes in. Like actually, you know, we skipped a bit. We've skipped a bit. So you're this burnout, things in your family happen. How did you discover breath work? Did you go on a course?
Okay.
Did
No,
Sam
so
relate? What happened?
so then what happened was 5 years into my GP practice, I decided, no, this was it. I could not practice in this way anymore. But and I knew that I wanted to practice more holistically, but I
Yep.
didn't have the skills, I didn't have the tools, and I didn't have the teachers, because at that stage, integrative medicine wasn't a thing. Certainly in South Africa, it wasn't a thing.
Right.
And so I dabbled in all kinds of modalities. And then I came across something called body talk.
Okay.
And this is an energy healing modality. It's been around for a while. I'm not sure if you know it. Yeah.
Yep.
And really that was my entry point into studying body mind medicine more formally. And it was fantastic because it brought together the principles of Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and consciousness and anatomy and physiology. And it, you know, it really just made sense to me. It appealed to my scientifically trained mind. But at the same time, also the mystical aspect of me. And so I started to practice this modality with some of my patients, and you know, amazing things started to happen. People's headaches got better, and I realized the body's self-healing capability. And so I moved away from treating symptoms in the way that I was trained to supporting the body's self-healing ability and figuring out what that meant. And
yeah, I'm just curious, like, what's your perspective on healing now? Because it strikes me you've got a kind of a pour in two different worlds, you know, the scientific and the mystical and the
well,
embodied. You've got a
right.
very, very rounded perspective.
Yeah, and the amazing thing is that it all comes together. These are not kind of dualistic concepts, you know, that I see the physical as part of consciousness, you know, that it's the physical body is miraculously designed to support the flow of breath, to support the flow of life force. And so it's now really all coming together for me. But so I'm going to go a little bit back.
Yeah. We're jumping around. I'm getting excited by the topic.
I know. So then it just became too much for me to practice this way. And I decided, okay, that's it. I'm selling my GP practice. And at that time, I was working with a social worker, and we started to do a lot of work together. She did counseling for my patients. I did some talks for her. And so she had a wellness center just out of Joburg, in a beautiful setting by the river. And she said, well, why don't we just do something together? Why don't you just come join me? And I decided yes. And I sold my practice and I moved out into the country. And the two of us started crafting our own methodology. So people would come in We would put them on programs where we integrated counseling, yoga, meditation, massage, body talk. I started to use more natural supplements. And so we did that for about maybe 5 or 6 years. And then Dan Brule came along. So Dan came to South Africa, and he used the space, the center to do a talk. And I thought, this guy looks interesting. Let me just see what he has to say. And the next thing I knew, I was asking him to train me, and I had my first conscious connected breathing session with him at that point. And of course, it was just completely life-changing. This was what I had been searching for, this feeling, it was like such a profound coming home. And
Great. We had Max on the show. We had Dan Brule on the show, and he's really a top guy and really just so much experience with the breath work, right? Like all the different techniques he knows and his enthusiasm for it. Like that must have been cool to train with him. Yeah.
And his training is not really training, it's just he is who he is. And so you just he's just got a very fluid style, and you just take what you need. And so I started to just practice more and read more, and I started to then bring it into my practice too. I started to do monthly workshops, and that just grew and it expanded. And so that was 8 years ago, and wow. It's become a fundamental part of my practice now. In fact, it's my core focus. Uh-huh. And, we've even started an organization called Breathwork Africa, where we're training practitioners and really crafting our own style of teaching breathwork, I suppose, that brings the science together with some of the yoga concepts and the embodied practices. So that's really exciting, and I'm just learning so much every single day. I get so incredibly fascinated and obsessed with the diaphragm and the fascia and the mitochondria and how
you're a breathwork geek then, huh? You're really into it.
Completely.
What do you find is, what techniques are like your go-to then? Like, what do you tend to do? Do you tend to do breath holds? Do you tend to do the 5-5 breathing? Like what's your kind of, like, I have my kind of 2 or 3 go-to techniques I do most days. Like, what's your go-to with clients?
My go-to is alternate nostril breathing. I love alternate nostril breathing. It's so soothing. It just works for me. But also depends. I'm also spoiled because I get to do I get to work with breath all day with patients. I talk about it, and I feel like it's very alive in me, and I use it for everything. I'm exercising, I tap into it. I am listening to someone share a story that's particularly painful. I use it. So it's very much within me. I feel like it's really alive in me and is supporting whatever it is I'm engaged with.
Right. Because the wonderful thing about breath is it's always there. You can work with it in ways that aren't intrusive or weird. And as you say, it's like it can have an influence on almost anything. It's like, okay, what's the situation right now? I'm interviewing someone, or I'm parenting, or I'm making love, or whatever. There's different parts of your day. And breath can be utilized even in some small subtle ways, like, I don't know, softening the end of the out breath, the transition between the out breath and the in breath, like in ways that are totally inobtrusive and can enhance things, whatever you're doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the whole point of breath work, is to really wake up the breath intelligence and expand our repertoire of what we're able to hold. And it supports increasing the flexibility of the body, but also the mind and also our feelings. So we're able to hold a wider range of feelings. We're able to go into intensity and relax within intensity. We're able to train deep relaxation into the system. So, and for me, that's what resilience is just having this wide range of energy states that we are able to navigate and hold. And I think this burnout epidemic, and burnout is something that I'm particularly interested in, is this addiction to our own adrenaline.
Right, right.
It's such a drug, this adrenaline.
Say about that, because I'm
It's
probably one of the ones who're
amazing.
guilty of this. So,
And we
like,
all
what is
are,
adrenaline addiction? Because there's so much
It's,
stimulation in the
I
world, and
know, it's fantastic, you know? And what worried me was that the most passionate people were the ones that were getting burnt out. The
right,
people
right.
who had so much to contribute to the world, who had so much energy, so much inspiration, so much passion, so much to share and give, were the ones that were burning out. And that really worried me. It really concerned me that, what is really going on, and how can we sustain this energy, this passion, this inspiration. And so I thought about this idea of integrating these recovery loops, so consciously inserting these recovery loops as a rhythm, and to train the system to really drop into that parasympathetic rest and digest mode, because it's not something that we're familiar with anymore. We don't know what that feeling is,
Right.
And so that's why I love the practices of yoga nidra, for example, or the feeling that we have here.
It's good to have the yin and the yang practices of breath, right? Some people
absolutely.
the supercharging ones, and I'm like, yeah, you need both. And we try to establish this in the conference. We say, listen, this is a marathon, not a sprint. When people come to work with us, and our team's always growing. Like I think Steve, for example, from Australia, is fairly new to the team, and we actually almost have to train people not to text us at 11 o'clock at night, not to email us on a Sunday,
Right.
And we have to say to people like, what, I end up almost, I wouldn't say bullying, but really like quite forcefully saying to my team, okay, when's your weekend? When's your downtime? Okay, you're doing the breathwork day. Okay, when are you taking a day off? And actually making that downtime and that down regulation part of our kind of company culture, because we're doing a big thing that is still several months out. And it's like, it's got to be sustainable, guys. This is like something I'm trying to, because I've seen too many, as you say, good people that have that passion and that enthusiasm. I'm 13 years into running a business, so it's like I wouldn't have survived or I hadn't at least learned some of that lesson. But it does feel like something I need to keep relearning, either at different levels or because our culture doesn't really, the modern world internationally doesn't really support that culture of rest and recovery. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. It's not sexy. It's not sexy to rest, And so it's far more challenging to train ourselves in that direction. But, it's absolutely fundamental, so that we can really show up for what we really believe in and what is important to us. And so it's like, the deeper we go, the more we can share, the more we can expand, the more we can impact. And the more that, the wider that influence becomes, the deeper we need to go.
Yeah, people don't realize this, but I'm known as being quite yang. People say, how do you do so much? And you put so much out with the conference. I'm like, I'm into massages. I'm into spas. I'm into meditating. I'm into walking in the woods. I'm like deep into that restorative stuff. Yeah. That's where I get my energy from. Right. And it's you can only go as far yang as you go yin. So for me, it's important. Let's geek out a bit on the science then, Alex, because I feel like you're strong here and not all our guests are strong in this way. So hit us with some breathwork science. Like I'd love to kind of learn something here around the science behind these practices that, maybe many listeners do, but they don't necessarily know why it works or how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been coming together for me, all of this, the science, and, I created something called a breath map, and I'll share it with you at some stage, but really breath is at the center. And if we look at the architecture of the physical body, you will see the skeleton, the muscular structure, the connective tissue, the fascia, connected to the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is just the most incredible structure, because it's almost as if all the fascia feeds into the diaphragm as the central point. And with every inhale and exhale, the diaphragm is moving, massaging the organs of the abdomen, massaging the heart, massaging the lungs. We're getting a whole internal massage that's happening with every breath that we take, if we are using the diaphragm consciously. So that's just on a physical level. Okay, so we have the biomechanics of breath work, where we see what's moving as we breathe. We also have the biodynamics of breathing. So when we breathe in specific ways, we can change the volume, we can change the rate, we can change the rhythm. And in changing the rate and the rhythm, we're affecting change in our autonomic nervous system. So we can, rev the body up consciously. We can slow the system down. So now we can see how it feeds into the autonomic nervous system. And we can see how it feeds into the digestive system. So, in so many ways, mechanically, but also through the effect of the vagus nerve. So now we can see how it all starts coming together. And then, so we have the biomechanics, we have the biodynamics, and then we look at the whole physiological mechanisms. So integrative physiology, breathwork will affect every single system. So in medicine, we train to see every system as separate. But when we study breathwork, we see that it's all just one system. So the digestive system is linked to the endocrine system, which is linked to the nervous system. It's linked to the lymphatic system, which is linked to the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system. They all are interconnected and work as one. Okay. So, and breath is an integral part of that. We need breath to manage our pH. So if we had to look at the autonomic nervous system, the heart rate is part of the autonomic nervous system. The body keeps itself into a state of homeostasis or balance. So pH, temperature, breathing, heart rate. Okay, and the easiest access to all of those is the breath, because we can consciously change the way we breathe.
Yep. Yep.
And when
you can't change your pH.
Right. Yeah. But we can when we change our breathing.
But directly, right. So you can change all those things through the breath, because that's the easiest access point, as you say, right?
Exactly. So we can have profound effect on our physiology when we change the way we breathe. And we're starting to understand why this happens now.
Right, it's pretty new, right? It's just coming together, the fascial stuff. And, I was in yoga classes years ago, and they say, oh, this increases your blood oxygenation. And it's like, not really. People are realizing this alternative nostril breathing works, but maybe it works for a different reason that people thought.
Right, exactly. Now we're starting to understand that breathing through the nose will increase your nitric oxide levels. We're understanding the effect of that. We are understanding the effect of humming on nitric oxide levels and our parasympathetic nervous system. So this is really compelling, exciting, cutting-edge science.
Yes,
we look into the mitochondria. So if we had to track breath right down to the cellular level, okay, so the oxygen is attached to the hemoglobin and reaches the cell level, okay, and we need carbon dioxide for that oxygen molecule to be discharged from the hemoglobin, okay. Then it arrives at the mitochondria, and that whole energy process happens, okay? And if we had to look at the structure of the mitochondria, how fascinating in itself, the mitochondria, okay, that part of the cell that takes up oxygen and glucose and releases ATP and carbon dioxide, that structure, the mitochondria, has its own DNA that is different from the DNA in our nucleus. Okay, and that DNA we only inherit from our maternal line. That is a mysterious phenomenon. There's something there that I think opens up a whole new field of research.
Another thing I can blame my mum for. It's just going to give me a lot of work with my therapist, Ella. So this is wonderful. I love that you. No, it's all good. We got on great. I love that you're geeking out on this. And I want to ask about this relationship between science and experience, because I've seen this relationship be unhealthy potentially in embodiment community in a few ways. One would be to deny science. You hear yoga teachers say all kinds of crap about yoga, which just is not scientific. But equally, another unhealthy extreme I've seen is people almost like put themselves subservient to science and say, well, the science says this, so it doesn't matter what you experience or feel, or justify what they're doing with science. Say, well, I do this, and then they'll sort of tag on some, people who don't have medical degrees usually will sort of tag on some kind of bad science and says, well, Amy Cuddy's Power Poses says, blah, blah, blah. So it's this relationship between the experiential and, from an Indian cultural background, right? There's this huge tradition of experiential work that's there going back a long time. And then we have this sort of Western emphasis on objective and double-blind studies and measuring things and, okay, what's the pH of the blood? You know, how do these things fit together for the modern practitioner? Because you are a truly integrative person in terms of your work. So anything you want to say on how do we live with these different worlds? How do we fit these things together?
You know, I think that a true scientist, and if you look at the greatest scientists in the world, Einstein, even the modern scientists that have done so much of research in the field of mindfulness, there's such a humility in understanding or not understanding the great mystery. There's an acknowledgement that there is a mysterious force at work, and that science is a way that this mystery reveals itself to humanity. And so there's a huge role for science, because it supports our understanding of the exquisite, perfect design of us as humans and us as part of all of nature. And I think that this kind of mystery, at the risk of sounding esoteric, reveals itself through scientific rigor. And it's something that we can test, and but there's a limiting aspect to science, and I think that science, the risk of being locked into that scientific method is an arrogance that comes with, okay, that this is cast in stone. And if COVID has taught us anything, is that it's not, because what we discover today becomes invalid tomorrow as we discover something new.
Yeah, it strikes me that the real scientists I've met or that I've read about are actually quite humble. They're actually quite open almost to the mystery or the mystical even,
Exactly.
And there's a sort of another way science can be used as a kind of authority. So it's, for example, you're a doctor. As soon as someone says you're a doctor, there's a certain weight of authority that comes with that, right? It's like, well, she must be telling the truth. It's like being a guru or being a sensei. There's a way in which it's the Western equivalent of that. And it's like, well, the doctor said, and it's a really interesting balance. And we've definitely seen this with COVID, between, on the one hand, giving too much authority, or other people have sort of swung the other way to sort of questioning everything. And it's like, conspiracy theories and doctors don't know anything. Right. And it's all a conspiracy. And it's like, where's the healthy line with that? Like, that used to be clear in the 80s when I was growing up, that was clear. And now it's really not clear. You're looking up stuff on the internet before you go to the doctor and questioning them in a new way. There's what's a conspiracy, what isn't. Like, that authority piece of science has been undermined, both from the sort of far right, the far left. There's so many ways that's been undermined.
And I see the gift in that, though, is that perhaps the invitation is for us to return to the wisdom of our own bodies, and to learn to trust the subtle signals, to learn to support the body's innate ability to heal itself, discovering what does that mean? What does that mean for me? And so, we're certainly seeing now that COVID affects different people differently. Why?
Yeah, different communities, different individuals.
Right.
It's pretty mysterious. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's really highlighting the fact that every single one of us are so different, with our own unique genetic makeup, with our own, metabolic pathways that that may be compromised in some of us. The impact of our individual diet, lifestyle, ways of thinking, belief systems that all shape our physiology, and the way that we are able to relate to disease and health and illness, and it's about really figuring that out for ourselves. So rather than handing health over to a system, to a pill, to a doctor, it's about, okay, yes, can I have a partner that will help me figure this out?
Right.
you
I could
know?
really imagine a place where you go to the doctor and you talk about your lifestyle and your health and your meditation, and maybe you hand over your Fitbit and they look at some of your measurements, you know, the scientific element. They go, "Oh, Mr. Walsh, your heart rate seems very high in the mornings. Are you stressed?" You know, and you know, where they talk about your lifestyle and they understand cultural differences and, you know, the ethnic differences, right? Like in terms of different like in South Africa, you know, there's three very different populations, right? In terms of like the genetics there and, you know, the health differences between those groups, and then the cultural factors. I mean, I can imagine this holistic approach,
Yeah.
and just being able to imagine it is a start, right? That like that even if it's not quite there when I go to the doctor, it's like some possibility at least, you know?
Yeah, I'm hoping that this is where we're moving to in medicine, you know, that this is the future of medicine, that it is individualized, that it's personalized, that there's a humility in understanding that
Mm-hmm.
there's a great mystery at play, that the universal laws that govern nature, that govern our makeup. And then if we can work in alignment with that, when we can live in alignment with that, and we can figure out what that means for us, then, you know, perhaps that's what healing is, you know?
Writing some notes here. By the way, if YouTube listeners see me tapping on my phone, that's because I'm taking notes from the session, just so YouTube listeners don't think I'm not listening to Ella or any of the other guests. I should say that a couple of times. Hey, I mean, something else that occurs to me, this kind of came up there in a slightly different context. At the moment, we have, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement and the kind of increased focus on justice around these kind of issues sweeping the world. And it strikes me as someone in South Africa, you maybe have a perspective on that. So I would, you know, if you don't want to talk about it, of course, totally okay. But is there anything you want to input on that in terms of, you know, you see different populations, you're living in, a lot of the perspectives I see come from the United States or maybe from Europe. So I'd love to hear if you have a perspective on this from there.
Yeah, this is a huge conversation, Mark. But
Right.
you know, I think from a South African perspective, when we came out of apartheid and we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and you know, everyone was full of hope, and you know, we went through that time. The healing didn't really happen then.
Okay.
And so, you know, certainly in this country, we're still sitting with so much of unhealed trauma. And we're seeing the effect of that now, right? And I think the invitation is for us to really to go there, to feel it, okay, to release it and to heal it and to integrate it. I think that the opposite can happen too, that in the process of healing, we not just feel it, but we feed it.
Okay.
So it's almost as if we're not really integrating it, and so that just increases the divisions that we experience within ourselves and between each other. And then it becomes a whole kind of cycle of blame and anger and victimness and guilt and you know, we're seeing this playing out now. There's so much confusion. How should I be feeling?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of confusion. And, you know, for me, I believe our work is to move through our pain towards being human. And it's very simple.
Yeah.
It's just respecting each other as human beings.
Right. Right. And I'm curious about the connection potentially with things like breath work and yoga and meditation, things we both love, to some of this work. Because I've heard people say, hey, this could be really good for having a more constructive dialogue. Whereas other people I've heard express concerns saying like, hey, this is a way to numb, or this is a way not to feel the concerns of others. And you don't want to self-regulate that pain away, you know, or that
Both
anger.
are valid. And I think both points are valid, Mark, you know. I think there's a risk of spiritually bypassing, but there's also a risk of feeding the story.
Right, right.
And I think that, you know, each of us the invitation is for us to take responsibility for our own pain, and to figure out what healing means for us. But I believe that, we have to, in that process, access something within us that is beyond our identity.
Right.
Identity is important. Our culture is important. Our history is important. It's all valid.
Yes.
Perhaps healing is to arrive at that point that is beyond labels, that is beyond identity, and that is that part in us is the same in all of us. We see it, we feel it.
Yes.
When you look into the eyes of another human being long enough and breathe, there's a connection that you feel that is beyond history, beyond your story, beyond your pain.
Yes.
There's a human connection that we cannot deny is there.
Right. It strikes me there's two mistakes being made right now. There's the sort of spiritual people saying like, hey, we're just this transcendent, as you say, bypassing any human stuff, and bypassing the fact that me as a man, you as a woman, you as a South African woman of color, me as a white guy, that's a different experience, right? Like, that's not just to be bypassed. I might want to consider some of that stuff, and you too, right? And the other mistake is saying we're just our identity. You know what?
Yeah.
There's nothing that connects me and you because we're different genders, different ethnicities. And both of those strike me as really unhealthy extremes. I don't hear many people saying like, hey, can we do a yes and here?
Right.
And the same with the self-regulation stuff. Can we self-regulate in a way which is helpful without being bypassing?
Right. We're so binary, right? As human beings, it's like it has to be this or that. And I found that, I really kind of play with the space between that like, healing is really a shade of gray.
Right. Taking a couple of notes here. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, well, I think I'd add some, maybe let's leave that one there because it's such a tricky topic, and I feel like we may have just added something constructive, which is difficult to do. So I hope that was useful. Is there anything else you want to say, feel free, but pretty happy that we managed to put something out there.
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of, we started off talking about life and death and the connection between death and breath. I don't know, I kind of want to circle back around to that. That felt like deep, and we almost like weren't ready for it in the conversation. Do you know what I mean? We're just meeting and it came up and we're like, whoa, we were dunked in the deep end. Like, say more about that connection between breath and death, because that wasn't intuitive what you said. It's kind of deep.
Yeah, I suppose it's coming a full circle for me in my personal life. As I said, death has been a part of my life from childhood. I've lost many close people and family, and walked the road with many patients who've died in that healing journey of death. And it occurred to me, and I think this was last year, that intellectually, I'm so fine with death. I'm so fine with dying.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that if I took myself to that point of my own death, there's an innate terror.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a primal innate fear.
Yep.
And I can't intellectually bypass that.
Right.
So let me work with that. Because if I face that ultimate fear, then perhaps that is some kind of freedom from other fear that I may have in my life. Because when we confront that massive, huge fear,
yes,
then it's a kind of a freedom of some kind. And then I can show up so much more openly in my life. I can make different choices. Because simply put, I don't have to sweat the small stuff anymore.
Right, it definitely, I've had, it definitely gives perspective, doesn't it? It definitely means you go, okay, compared to that, if I can at least a little bit face that primal fear, that huge underlying fear of not being that is there, once we cut the bullshit, it's there, then it's like everything else becomes a lot more easy. And it feels like to me there's a second one for human beings, which is not far off that, which is sort of social death. Our first fear is existential death, you know, non-existence, but not far above that is this fear we have of being exercised from the group, you know, like being
the fear
chucked
of
out
not
of being,
belonging, you
right.
know?
That's not far up from that in terms of our fears, is it,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely, because that speaks to safety. You know, when we belong, we feel safe. And so that's a fundamental aspect of being human. But I think this idea of death also comes back to this idea of identity, you know, because it's really the same conversation. Because, you know, when we let go of this idea of letting go of the body, we can let go of identity, we can let go of our identification with things that we think are important.
Right. I wonder if I can jump in there. I wonder if the sort of obsession with identity, which is sort of seems to have come to the fore recently, is almost a attempt at immortality. It's saying, you know what, like I'm this, and this is real, and this is permanent, and this, you know, this is a group, and the group are not going to die, and the group is the thing. And there seems to be I'm trying to figure this out. So I'm thinking out loud here. I hope you don't mind that there's something about the connection. You know, these two things have just happened, the COVID and then the sort of bringing to the fore of some very, you know, real and important concerns, but it's really come to the fore. And it's like suddenly identity has become huge.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm trying to figure out that connection between this existential threat and this identity being pushed forward in a way that I haven't seen before. And I don't want people to mishear this, that I'm saying there aren't super important concerns, but there's something in that connection I haven't quite figured out yet.
Right. No, yeah, I think you're onto something there, Mark. And I think if COVID has, you know, invited us to think about anything, it's really, and it's interesting that this COVID thing is happening at the same time as the Black Lives Matter movement. They're different, but in some way it speaks to what we are just saying. It's like we're confronting mortality, we're confronting our own death, but we also are really interrogating this idea of identity, the importance of it, how we relate to it, and perhaps an aspect of it that needs to die in order for healing to happen.
Yeah, if I'm going to be totally honest, I feel like I don't understand it, but I feel like it's one to raise. It feels dangerous to raise it. It's like, how do we have this conversation in a way which isn't going to get me crucified? You know, it's kind of like, but I don't even have an opinion there. So I'm not like hiding an opinion. It's more like I'm just going, there's something in that connection which isn't being stated right now. And I don't know what it is. There's lots of other good stuff being stated that I could, you know, fully get behind and say, okay, police violence, not a good thing. Okay. 100%. But then it's like, there's something else about that connection that we've played with a little bit today.
I don't think it's clear yet. But I think that, you know, if we're curious enough and we can just give ourselves time to watch and observe and not react, but at the same time not dissociate from what's happening, but really give ourselves time to feel into what's happening individually and collectively. Then I believe there's an opportunity for some deep insights to come from this very profound time.
That is it's a wonderful balancing line you just said, not react and not dissociate. You know what I mean? And whatever the issue is, right? Like, it's like, can we not be in that reactive fight or flight, but still equally feel the passion of violation and injustice and the, you know, the things that are going on that are painful and we need to look at, even though they're painful, in myself and in the world. And then simultaneously, not sort of doing so much breath work and yoga that we're kind of trying to transcend it all and get away from it. Like, I'd love to hear more people talk about that fine line and that balance. And I feel like that's been a kind of central theme here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Ella, we're moving towards a close here. Is there anything you want to say as we wrap up, or anything you haven't, you know, kind of stated that's a big part of your work? Or I feel like we've gone
Well,
deep and we're getting
wow.
to know each other. So
Yeah. I mean, I was really excited to talk to you today because I knew that we could, and I feel comfortable with going deep with you. And it's not very often that I can do this in an interview.
it's a real conversation, right? And that is actually kind of rare. You're not getting that on Facebook most days. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. And so, yeah, I just want to say thank you for allowing the space for this brave conversation. And I know that not many people will agree with what we've said, and you know, it will be activating for many. But you know, let's be brave enough to have these conversations.
Real conversations, right? Real conversations. Yeah, I just felt myself taking a sort of breath there, like a bit of a sigh of relief almost, a bit of a like, okay, I kind of showed up with some courage, but without being too stupid about things and kind of going, okay, let's actually talk real. And I'm enjoying getting to know you, Ela. I'm sure we'll have points of interaction again in the future. You're always welcome at our Embodiment conference events. Where do people find your stuff, Ela, online? Like, what's the best place
Yeah,
to
online. So my website's drelamanga.com. I'm on Instagram at Ela Manga, and I'm on Twitter. Not that
and
active
it's
though.
Ela, like ELA, and then Manga,
ELAMANGA.
like the comics, right? MAN for November,
That's
GA.
it. Yeah,
So people will
exactly.
probably guess that spelling. Okay, great. So
Exactly.
drelamanga.com, is that right? I'm
Dot com. Yeah.
just
You
going to
can
check this.
also
So
find me on YouTube. Yeah, there's some stuff on YouTube. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to track down.
great. Well, this has been a total pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Manga. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mark.